Michael Zimmerman.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
It's nice to be here.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Now, you shared something earlier that I thought was that you've never been interviewed.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. You're seeing a first here tonight, folks.
There you go. Yeah.
Tell me about Chicago. You grew up in that area, and what was your childhood like? Normal things that kids do?
Yeah, I was born in Chicago and then in 43, and then after the war, my brother was born there too, and then my parents moved to a little suburb on the railroad line about 14 miles out of the city, which was at the time about 1,500.
Are you good?
Well, I spent a lot of my money on a car, and then I think the second time I took it to the drags, I'd put a Corvette engine in an old 55 Chevy.
Wow.
And I was going down the strip and punched the clutch and blew the clutch up and got nicked by bits and pieces, and I ended up having to sell the car and bought a 28 chopped Ford coupe, put the engine in it, and never got the money to get it going again.
Are you still a car person?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you drag race?
Not now. I got into motorcycles when I got to law school, and I've been riding motorcycles. I've kind of haven't done much in the past few years, but I started 95 taking long trips in the summer with a bunch of lawyers and judges.
Let's talk about the law. That, of course, was a career. It still is a career of yours.
Yeah.
So what led you to that? Was it just something natural, or was it?
You know, I was thinking before I came here, when I was young, I was really interested in history and government stuff, and I knew that lawyers were, there was a lot of lawyers in Congress and all the rest of that. And I used to watch Perry Mason. Anybody watched Perry Mason in the 50s and 60s, who wouldn't want to be the guy that always was right, always won the case? But I don't really know. My mother, I think, wanted me to be a lawyer, because when we moved to Arizona after my first year in high school, I went in to see the counselor, and I said, I want to take Spanish because, this is Arizona. There's a lot of Hispanics. And my mother said, shouldn't you take Latin? Because the lawyers need Latin. So I ended up taking 3 years of Latin.
Good for crossword puzzles, though.
Yeah. So I think she kind of wanted me to do that, but I never met a lawyer till I went to law school.
Did you proceed in the typical 3 years, or did it take you longer or shorter?
Well, it took me 5.5 years to get through undergraduate, so I spent most of my time working and goofing off, and I was not a stellar student in college. And then at some time when I was about 20, 21, living in my parents' basement in Salt Lake, and I thought, this is not going anywhere. So I started getting serious, and I got into the U, and it turned out it was something I was good at.
Well, and your career, by some standards, was meteoric, but not necessarily planned that way.
Well, I'd say, yeah, I just I got really lucky. So I went to law school, and I ended up being first in my class, and I talked to my law professors. I said, what do we do with this degree? And they said, you can try private practice. I spent a summer in Phoenix at a firm at Snell and Wilmer, and I came back to law school, and I said, I don't want to do whatever that is. And I said, what else could I do? And they said, well, you could go to graduate school. And I said, I don't need any more graduate school. And they said, well, you could clerk for a judge maybe. And I said, well, what do they do? And I mean, it was a period when people weren't as sophisticated, I guess, or at least I wasn't. And they said, well, go get a couple of federal reporters and we'll check the names of judges we think would be worth applying to. And they said D.C. Circuit, Ninth Circuit, that sort of thing. And it turned out one of my law professors, head clerk for Warren Burger on the D.C. Circuit in the 50s, early 50s, when he got out of Stanford. And he said, well, why don't you apply to him and apply to this other judge? And so I did, and I got an interview, and I went back the day after Richard Nixon was elected in 68, and interviewed two judges on the D.C. Circuit, and one of them said, well, I'd be glad to give you a job, but if you get the opportunity, take a clerkship with Berger because he's, kind of a prominent conservative guy. So Berger offered me a job, and I think my law professors must have given me a strong endorsement or something because, somebody from Utah in those days, Utah had 1 million people. I mean, it was kind of a backwater. And he got appointed to be the Chief Justice 4 months later, and I didn't hear anything, and then I got a phone call one day and said, well, you're coming with me. So I got to go to the Supreme Court and with all the people from the Ivy League, and it was a little intimidating, but...
Wow. So how long did that last?
A year.
A year. And then you were back to Utah?
No, then I went to O'Melveny and Myers in Los Angeles, which was then the largest firm in California. Law firms had gotten a lot bigger. It was like 140 people. And I was in L.A. for 6 years and did a little bit of politics stuff with people and worked with some really good lawyers, one of whom became Secretary of State later. And then after 5 or 6 years, I got an offer to come up and interview at the U to see if they wanted me to teach. And I had thought about it when I was in law school, but I was kind of getting over that. And I flew up for an interview, and the second day I was here interviewing at the law school, I was staying with my parents, and my dad had a leather jacket. He put it on, and he said, this is a great jacket. It's going to last me the rest of my life. And he went to the office, and he had an abdominal aorta aneurysm, and he dropped dead that day. And I had a girlfriend that I had broken up with in L.A., and she was diagnosed the next month with brain cancer. So I thought, maybe I should go back to Salt Lake, be with my mother, and my brother and sister were here, and I took the job at the U.
Did you like teaching?
I liked the classroom, but the prospect of being an academic writing endless articles did not appeal to me. I liked the action of practice a lot more. So I only lasted a couple of years.
At some point, we'll jump ahead just a little bit, you became surreptitiously special counsel to Governor Scott Matheson.
Yeah, that was another thing the law school did for me. Is one of my professors said, Dan Berman, who was a big Democratic lawyer in Salt Lake, was doing work for Matheson, but he didn't want to keep doing it for free. And they wanted to put him on to somebody who could help him. And I didn't know the governor, but I went to breakfast with him for a couple hours, and he offered me a job. And then it turned out the AG wouldn't let me officially be his counsel. So the governor said he could hire me as the assistant state planning coordinator. for
workaround.
$10,000 a year. Ooh. So I opened up an office. I just bought a desk and a typewriter, and there was a spare office in my brother's law firm, and I just started practicing on my own and then working for Scott most of the time. And that was exciting. I really loved that.
Was it the politics? Was it the policy making? What was it that was exciting for you?
The politics is interesting, and the policy making was great because Matheson was involved in the nuclear fallout stuff from southern Utah, and I was one of the 2-point people on that. Spent a lot of time with the Department of Energy, going to meetings in Vegas and looking at the documents on the fallout, where it went. The U was involved in it. And the nerve gas thing in the West Desert, the 6,000 sheep that died. And Scott was, I would say he's one of the best people I ever worked for. He was just a delightful guy, very sharp, and he was a terrific guy to work for.
And before he finished his second term, he appointed you to the Utah Supreme Court.
Yeah. My wife and I were going to have kids, and I couldn't keep working on my own, so I went with a law firm, and he suggested I go with the firm that his campaign manager had, Dave Watkus, and I worked there for 4 years, and that was a lot. It was a pretty intense practice. And I was looking around, and actually Pat Shea, who was close to the governor too, came to me and said, there's this vacancy. Dallin Oaks is going into the church, and would you like to apply? And I was 40, and I thought, well, I'd prefer it were later in life, but you don't pass up opportunities, so I applied and got appointed, yeah.
Well, I want to get back to the progress of your life in a bit, but the judicial branch at all levels has certainly been a lightning rod.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent?
I think Utah, in 1984 there was a referendum, and it passed a constitutional amendment and gave the judiciary, sort of consolidated the state judiciary. It used to be that every county paid for the courthouses and all that stuff, so the state took it all over. And then there was a period from 84, maybe 88, 89, where a court of appeals was established and a good administrative structure. And I think Utah has a terrific judiciary. I think the National Center for State Courts would tell you organizationally we are an exemplar. And Matheson cared a lot about the Supreme Court and the courts and appointed good judges. There was a period in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, where Utah was not an exemplar. But I think it really has quite a good judiciary, and it's natural that it's a lightning rod. Like this current fracas with the legislature. Mm-hmm. They don't have the power of the purse, but they do. They keep the legislature and the governor in line in terms of constitutional issues.
You were appointed as the Chief Justice.
Yeah, it's an election we have inside the court. Yeah, after 10 years, I was elected chief. And that was a lot of fun. It's an administrative job primarily. I think that's something the legislature doesn't appreciate. This last session they passed a law giving the governor the power to appoint the chief. And I don't know what they think the chief does, but the chief is just one vote on the court. But the chief's job is really to run the administrative office for the courts. And when I was chief, there were 1,300 employees, and I'm sure it's up now. So it's a big bureaucracy. But I find that a lot of fun. You know, we built the Matheson Courthouse downtown when I was on the committee that constructed that, and did a study on gender and justice, see how women were treated in the courts, inside and as participants. And then we did a big study on racial and ethnic fairness in the judiciary, too. So those are the kind of initiatives that you get to work on that are important and fun at the same time.
You mentioned your dad's death and your girlfriend. You also had just as you were being appointed.
Yeah. So I was married to Lynn Mariani, and we had 3 daughters. And in like 90, maybe 91, she had a really small melanoma on her shin, and it was taken off. And we were told, you know, the margins were clear. And then in right around Valentine's Day in 93, she was having back pains, and she went to see her brother, who was a surgeon at St. Mark's Hospital, and he had a scan done and liver tests done, and her chemistries were all off, and she had cancer in the liver, and it was already dying. So apparently, melanoma's a very sneaky cancer. And they gave her a year to live, and she lived just about a year. But so we had a 4-year-old, 8-year-old, and an 11-year-old daughters, and she was given tamoxifen, which is a chemo, which later on, after she died, determined that in many cases it causes depression. And she got depressed pretty quickly, tried to commit suicide a couple of times, and then kind of plateaued. So during that year, she didn't drive, and I had Joanne Slotnick help me get somebody to care for the girls, and so I was, trying to take care of the family and do my job, and I was going to become the chief in '94 in January. And I tried, antidepressants, another drink at night, more exercise. But it was, it was a lot.
Was this the point when meditation became...
Yeah, there was a coincidence. We had a neighbor across the street where we lived who was kind of a health and wellness person at the U, a nurse. And she said, like 2 weeks after Lynn was diagnosed, she said, this John Kabat-Zinn is coming to town doing a workshop, and he's a mindfulness-based stress reduction guy. And he's doing something out at the airport, Hilton. So we signed up, and we went. We didn't go to all of it, but we went to a substantial part of it. And I found it interesting. I mean, I was interested in Eastern religions. About 5 years earlier, I'd started reading about him. But I read his book, and I didn't really start meditating. I just tried everything else, and then when it got close to Lynn's death, and I was, kind of couldn't really put myself in a good place. Mm-hmm. I got up. I started getting up in the morning, going out and sitting on the porch, and just doing some of the steps that he described. Just going to the breath, going into bodily sensations, and getting out of my head, thinking, not thinking about the past or the future, just being in the present, in your body. And, for 20 minutes, there was no problem. And if you don't think about the past and the future and you're just right here, everything was fine. So, and that could carry over a little bit. And so I began to get really quite intrigued with recognizing how much thinking about the past and the future and thinking we can control or should be able to control or never are able to control and resent the fact that we can't, our lives. But right this moment, everything's fine if you stay in your body and your sensations. So I just started meditating, and then kind of coincidentally, a year or two later, we hired Diane Hamilton, who had lived down here with Tony Smith when she was married to Tony, as a mediator, kind of headed up mediation, which we were bringing into the courts. Mm-hmm. And she was the first Western Buddhist I ever met. I had a secretary once who was Japanese, but other than that, I'd never encountered anybody. And she told me there was a Zen center 4 blocks from my house, and I went down there and it kind of fell in. And
the rest is history.
Yeah.
I want to talk some more about that in a bit. But back to the law, and you've been pretty outspoken saying that judges shouldn't necessarily serve a lifetime term.
Yeah, I think my experience as a judge was, when you start out, and Utah is a common law. In other words, judges make law when there isn't statute, and there's a lot of places particularly in a small state, where there aren't a lot of cases. So judges take the English common law and what other states have and sort of make law that fits into the cracks that aren't filled by the legislature. And I think when I first got on, I would, go look way back and find cases and sort of see what made sense, and that's how I think all of us worked. But then as you get going, you start doing things in light of what you did before. So, and you begin to develop almost a personal jurisprudence, and you kind of push that, and other members of the court are pushing theirs, and I think you get too personally invested. And the longer, and then there's another factor, and we used to talk about this sometimes on the court, the day you go on the bench is the day you begin to get stale, because you're not in practice anymore. You're not really seeing what's going on in the business. And you kind of become cloistered. And I think as time went on, I could just see myself, and I saw other judges doing the same thing. You hunker down with your own cases and your own. Sure. It's important, and I think after.
Well, you served 16 years, right? What's an ideal?
I would say 20 years is everybody. It used to be that people got appointed mostly when they're older, but inevitably there are times when politicians want to put young people on the courts, and they do. And if you stay for 40 years, I could have stayed for, 35 years. I think that wouldn't have been a good thing for me or for the system.
Public opinion, politics, does that... You talk about your personal jurisprudence, but what about public opinion and politics?
Well, there's always a dance. The one thing about judges usually is that lawyers are sort of trained to, they get fine points on their heads, sort of. And so there's a measure of self-restraint that's kind of trained into them. But there's no question that deciding cases is about the entirety of who you are and your experience and your sense of what's fair. And there's always room for that almost always in the case law.
What would you say is your most satisfying case, or most disappointing, maybe even controversial?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I think, what would I say? I would say a case that in retrospect I would say was hard was one of the hi-fi murderers. This was a guy who actually had not killed anybody. He was 19 or something when the murders were committed. He assisted, sort of the bad guys, but he was seeking post-conviction relief, and I think by the time he got to us on a habeas corpus writ, he was maybe 37. And he had really fundamentally changed in prison, become a preacher and worked in the health clinic and all of the rest of that. And his lawyer was arguing, there was all kinds of problems with the trial. There was all kinds of indications of racial bias, notes slipped to jurors, hang the nigger kind of thing. Wow. But it had gone through the review process and his claims had been rejected earlier. And we really didn't have a basis for going in and doing anything about it. One of the members of the court dissented, and I was kind of tortured by it, but I voted to execute the guy, and we all had cop cars at our houses when he was executed. And later on, I kind of figured out what the conflict was, is your job as a judge, according to the law, is when you look at a case like that, you don't get to look at the person that they are today. You are not entitled to look at that. You're entitled to look only at who they were at the time. So I had to look at him as a 19-year-old, not as a 37-year-old. Who he was the day we executed him wasn't relevant.
Wow.
And that's painful.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it a lot, that, that's what you have to do. But
if it was an easy job, everybody'd do it, right?
Yeah, well, the system's set up that the governor has a chance to do that, or, to commute a sentence, but it's not popular to do that kind of thing.
If anybody's got questions, we'll take them for a bit now. You just need to step to the microphone. Those of you watching on Facebook Live, please use the chat function, and we'll have it read for us to talk about.
Yeah.
Anybody? Okay. One last thing in terms of the law, and then I want to move to your other career. The appellate function, what is it that's attractive to you? And maybe you can explain that a little bit for us.
Yeah, so trial, cases go to trial and facts are found. The jury finds or the judge finds what the facts are and then applies the law to the facts. And then people appeal, and they appeal either they claim there's some error in the fact finding, or they claim that the law is not applied properly. And the thing about the appellate function is no case is very few cases are identical to a case before them. And cases that appellate courts take, particularly at the Supreme Court where we have discretion what we take, you should take cases that they fall between the stool. So when they fall between the stool and there isn't a clear rule, then you are trying to decide what the law should be, looking backwards to find what the markers are, and then trying to, use your best judgment, working with four other people to decide what it should be. And that's always tricky. And at first, I think when I first went on the court, you think, I can see what this ought to be, and you write a lot about what it should be, and then 5 years later you get another case that's a half inch off of that, and it turns out, well, no, that prediction wasn't very good, and then you start making shorter term decisions and narrower decisions, because prediction is always, it's part of the game, and yet at the same time it takes you a little while to realize you're not very good at predicting. So that's always, and then the dialogue with other judges. I think deciding by yourself, I've done a lot of arbitrations over the past 25 years since I got off the bench. And those you have to decide them all yourself. You're the trial judge. That doesn't have the dialogue in it with other people. And I participate sometimes in three arbitrator panels. And then there's the dialogue, the back and forth that you have on an appellate bench, where you might tend to be a little bit of a detail person, and somebody doesn't quite fill the details, and you're tending to rule against them on that. And then you get with two other people, and they say, well, come on, and this, and so you're kind of bargaining, and you're softening things. And I think that's the interesting part about the appellate function.
And your current law firm that you put together, that's your
that's
function.
That's all we do. We just take appeals.
So and Christine Durham, former
she was
Chief
with
Justice.
us for a while, And
so your perspective is you really know from the other side.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the advantage, and I think you develop a sense of what appeals to judges. And we do most of our work with the Utah appellate courts. So you know the judges, and you know kind of what their patterns are, and it's a lot of fun.
Do you ever get surprised?
Oh, sure. Disappointed and surprised. That's the nature of being a lawyer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Questions, anybody? Amy, do we have any from... Oh, go ahead.
I have a question while we're still on the law issue. I don't have much experience with the courts, but I've served on a couple of juries in the past, and I found the experience sort of intensely frustrating because I didn't feel like either the prosecution lawyer or the defense lawyer were actually trying to get at the truth. They were actually trying to tell stories to the jury that supported their argument. And so when you talked about sort of the purpose of the courts is coming up with facts and the truth, that wasn't my experience. We really had to read between the lines to try and find what we thought was the truth. And I wonder what your perspective as a judge is on that sort of storytelling aspect.
Well, first of all, when there's a jury and when questions of fact are put to the jury, the jury has to decide. Judges can't disturb that much. And persuasion, I think, is storytelling. I mean, if you have 10 facts and you're trying to weave them so they go this way and not that way, that's a story. And anytime there's an inference, you get to draw it in favor of your client and the other guy draws it in favor of the other client. And I think the jury's job is a little to do what you're saying you had to do. is you got to try to say, what are those 10 facts? What kind of sense do they make to us, given what we've been told? And you get to do that, and the judge can't do anything to make it clearer, because that's not the judge's job. That's the jury's job. And I think I've never sat on a jury. And I think that's probably a tricky job.
I agree.
And it depends on the lawyers, and it depends on the facts. And I bet you go in that jury room and everybody brings their own story. I mean, I've done some mock arguments to juries and listened to juries deliberate, and they can be all over the lot. Reach wildly different conclusions. And that's just the way the law works. So I can imagine it's frustrating because you want to know you did it right.
Right.
But right is what you say after the fact.
It was fascinating, but frustrating.
Yeah, I can understand that.
My name's Cal Boardman, Mike, and my question relates to an even earlier part of the story
Yeah.
we've been weaving tonight. So before you segue to the next part, I think you and I have a mutual friend who...
Your name's familiar.
Pardon me?
Your name is familiar.
Our mutual friend manufactured the speeding bullet race car out of an airplane fuel tank.
Yes.
And
Yes.
his goal was to race that on the Bonneville.
That's
State
right.
Streets. And I understood that you were going to drive that.
I did drive it. Yes. Yes.
Okay, my question was going to be, why did you not drive it? But you did. So now my question is, why?
Well, this is a guy that I met when I first moved to Salt Lake named Walter Netka. And we roomed together. When I came back to Salt Lake from L.A., we've stayed in contact. We play pool every Sunday now. And Pete wanted to build a salt flats car. And he said, you want to do it with me? And I was, I'd started riding motorcycles, and which was not a terribly responsible thing to do as a single parent. But anyway, but Pete said, this is probably 8 or 9 years ago. And I said, sure, Pete. And we went in on a garage. We have a garage where he has a shop set up. And he went to Arizona and shopped fuel tanks off of a helicopter, a couple of them, and we built a car and put a snowmobile engine in it and supercharged it. And in the past 5 years, trying to get it to run fast, I drove it for a couple of years and then decided as fast as it was going to have to be going. Maybe I didn't want to be in it if it came apart, but yeah. And Pete's still struggling with it. He says he's going to give it another year. But making a car is hard, particularly when you take an engine and a drive system out of a snowmobile and try and make it into work on a, go 140 miles an hour.
How fast did you go?
I got up about 90, and then we blew an engine. We've been through 2 engines and on and on and on.
Good.
It's fun, but yeah.
That's history now.
Yeah, it's kind of history.
Stuart, any questions?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? Michael, you have a moniker of Michael Mugaku Zimmerman Roshi.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so after my wife died and I started studying at the Zen Center in Salt Lake, and Diane came too, and she had gone to Naropa University in Boulder, which is run by was a Tibetan Buddhist institution. Chogyam Trungpa started it. He's Tibetan who came from Oxford and then came to Boulder, and she got a master's in Buddhist psychology, psychotherapy. And so we started studying with Dennis Genpo Merzel, who was a successor of a Japanese monk who founded the Zen Center of Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. And he had moved to Salt Lake and had about 40 or 50 people that he had collected in Europe and in the other places, and sort of had effectively a monastery on South Temple at 13th East. And we studied with him until 2011, and we started in about 97. And we both became teachers. And Diane has gone out and taught around the country. And then we started in 2008. We bought that place over here in 2004. And then 2008 we formed a 501c3 church, Boulder Mountain Zendo. And we started holding retreats in a tent on the back of the lot back there. And then in about 2015 or 16, Diane decided she wanted to build a permanent structure, so we raised money and built the Zendo that we've got over there. And then we have a place in Salt Lake where we practice there, and Diane's right now running a month-long retreat in Salt Lake. She's down here about 3 weeks in the summer, and I come down for a week or two in September. And so this is what we do.
Who attends your?
Diane has, because she worked with a guy out of Boulder and went around the country with him and with a lot of spiritual teachers. She has students from Europe, from South America, from Canada, and she has a kind of that group, and she has 4 successors who are, one's in Canada and 3 of them are in Boulder. I basically sit in the mornings in Salt Lake, and so whoever walks in the door. So it's I'm every 5 days a week. I'm sitting in the morning and doing meditation, and I do 4 or 5 day retreats in Salt Lake. And I think we basically say anybody who comes to Buddhist practice in the States is somebody who's feel that there's something's wrong, and they've got an itch that they need scratching, because it isn't like nobody's basically who are Americans are generally raised as Buddhists, so everybody's a convert, if you will. And a lot of the people don't become Buddhists; they just come and sit with us. Mm-hmm. So I let anybody who wants come sit and study. I teach online, a book. We do book groups and things like that.
What's the significance? I understand the term Yoshi is very special.
Well, it just means that we've been through the training with our teacher, and he gave us permission to teach. Zen is very much a lineage, so you have to be sort of permitted to teach by somebody to teach, and then you have to permit other people to teach. And there's curriculum, and then a Roshi is somebody who has kind of gotten final approval, and which usually in our school is 10 years after you've started teaching. So Diane and I both got final approval from a fellow who was in New Mexico, who was another, had studied at UCLA, ZCLA. And so Diane has 4 successors already who are out teaching. I don't have anybody yet.
But you've written and taught a lot about mindfulness for lawyers.
Yeah, I had starting in the middle of the 2000s, I got involved with somebody who had been the dean at CUNY University, what's now university, but it's in New York City, the law school, and he was in Berkeley, and he was putting together people to try to bring mindfulness practice to lawyers, because lawyers have, in the first 10 years of law practice, lawyers have 3 times the average alcohol, anxiety, drug addiction problems compared to the average population. So they're really heavily anxiety, psychologically stressed, and because it's such an aggressive, competitive profession. And his idea was bring mindfulness practice to lawyers. And so I've done a number of situations in which we've gone out and tried to run seminars for lawyers. The problem I find with lawyers is they think it's a great idea, but they don't take the time to actually stick with it. Because it's the psychology of lawyers is, competitive, individualistic, aggressive, and
have you had feedback on some successes, perhaps?
Some, yeah. In my own case, I think when I was before I started practicing, doing my Buddhist practice, I was very intense, very aggressive, migraine headaches, all that sort of stuff. And once I went back into practice after getting off the court, I was concerned, was this going to be the same thing? And actually, it's been, maybe it's just older, but it's also the practice. It just doesn't bother me. I have a much better capacity to remain sort of equanimous in the middle of, watching myself. I can watch myself start to get angry or uptight and can kind of relax it. So it's actually, I've enjoyed practice a lot since I got back into it 25 years ago.
What do you want your legacy to be in general?
I hope my kids are happy, my daughters are happy. And I hope I haven't created too much problem for anybody. And I would like to hope that I've helped people.
Do you have you've mentioned successors,
Yeah.
which is instructive to me now. But is there a succession plan for the 2 Arrows Inn?
Well, we're working on that right now. We're trying to, because I'm 81, Diane is 66. She'd like to retire at some point on this. I don't have any intention of retiring, but yeah, we're trying to get people who will take it over and keep it going. You know, we have a lot of money stuck over here in the property and the Zendo and in Salt Lake, and we're trying to sort of move it from being a mom and pop operation to something with a solid economic foundation and people that are willing to pick it up and run with it.
Are there models for you to follow?
You know, I think you just have to find people that are willing to step up. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of serendipity. You know, I think it's a little like Entrada, right? You have to find people that are really interested in it and want to pick it up and run with it. And that's what we're trying to work with. We're right now putting some pretty serious attention into getting people on board who are really willing to pick it up and
So what's next for Michael Zimmerman?
You know, I don't know. I'm continuing to do arbitrations on a slow basis. Diane and I are caring for Diane's son who has Down syndrome and is a type 1 diabetic, so he's 35, 36, and taking care of him. His father died last year, and we'll just keep on teaching and practicing. And
so you have a pretty full plate.
Yeah.
And you enjoy it.
Yeah, but all my daughters all three of them are back in Utah now, and so they're all here. One of them had been away for about 18 years, so I'm getting to spend more time with them, and I have 5 grandchildren, and it's good.
Great.
It's a good place to be.
Michael, thanks so much for being our guest on Classic Conversation.
Thank you. It's fun.
Thanks to all of you for being here in the Robbers Roost and those watching on Facebook Live. We appreciate you. Just a few notes coming up this Saturday. Terry Bollinger and Harvey Leek will tell the story of Zane Grey's 1929 journey through Torrey. April 12th, we have the sounds of Emily Hicks. Local favorites, Will Barkley and Steve Lutz will present their blend of original and traditional tunes on the 19th. And next month's Classic Conversation will be Cass Bromley, Superintendent of Capitol Reef National Park. And we'll maybe get some insights about not just what's happening at the park, but she probably has some broader views as well.
I hope he still has employees down there.
I hope she does too. Yeah, I understand they've missed the axe, not entirely, but the biggest part of it. Monthly calendar for Entrada appears in the Insider, both online and in print, as long as it's still in print. And Entrada's website has the calendar as well. And if you'd like to be on the email list, I'm guessing that most of you already are, you can go to the Entrada website and make a note there. Again, please do pass by the hat, and remember, nothing that is need be just because it was. Good night. Safe travels. It's still snowing a little bit out there. Thank you all.
Thank you.